That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things have happened." Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, it's going to be a super long sermon because it's a super long passage. So kudos to Danielle. I'm just kidding. I have a timer here, so keep it. I guess I'm allowed to do whatever I want. The live stream's off, so. Hey, happy Eastertide. Christ is risen. That's right. It's fun to teach the week after Easter. We're in this 50 days of Eastertide, this celebratory season. And saying Christ is risen and hearing a few of you say he's risen indeed is a celebratory phrase that we can use. It's easy to kind of have that celebration mindset because we live in the future of the text that Danielle just read. We live with 2020 vision of this text. And the text that we just read, though, if you I know it wasn't up on the screen, but at the beginning, it doesn't start very celebratory. It starts very solemn, confused, kind of filled with sadness is actually the language of the ESV and other translations will use as well. So this passage has a sadness to it, while we're, thousands of years later talking about this celebratory aspect of Easter. So there's a confusion there within the story. I want us to unpack that confusion a little bit and some of that distraught and duress that was being felt, because I think that there actually is an invitation for us in this passage, in this story, thousands of years later, while we're celebrating, but also maybe today be a little vulnerable to say, like, how do I celebrate well, but also how do I hold both? We're going to talk a little bit today about the knowing and then also the unknowing of life. We're going to talk about what it means to have hope and what that could mean, but also what it means to also see real redemption at the same time. So if you're brave with me, we'll go through this passage and we'll learn a little bit today about holding both of these things and see what that means for us as we live in this human condition on this space rock that's flying through the universe. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the passage, and then as I walk through, I just want to kind of sneak around and see some stuff and talk about it, and then we'll see where it lands. So verses 13 and 14, it says, "And behold, on that very day, the two of them were walking and going from the village named to the village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles. Of course, the Bible would use the number. Of course, this is 7 miles away from Jerusalem. and they were talking with each other about these things which had taken place. What were they talking about? Why would these two be walking away from Jerusalem and be talking about these things? Well, let's put ourselves in the context of this story. What was actually happening just before this story? What did we just celebrate a week ago, and what were we talking about during the week before Lent, during Holy Week? So if we put ourselves in this imaginative story, let's go back to Passover week, to Holy Week. Everybody is ready. We're super pumped. Families are coming together. Everyone is traveling from afar to get to Jerusalem. Everything is hyped. It's super fun. Jesus is coming in. This guy who they've been following, or if you haven't been following him, through rumor, has been talking about how the kingdom is at hand. And then, as he enters into Jerusalem, Jesus is arrested. He's taken away from the celebration. What comes next is horrific, something that nobody would have seen coming, going to Jerusalem. This was supposed to be the place where everything culminated, where the victory would be won, where they would be on the right side of the battle. Jesus is taken, he's arrested, and then publicly, well, it's terrible. And everybody sees it. So what would you be talking about a few days later? If you had given away everything, if you had sold your possessions, left your home, followed some random guy who says that he is the awaited Messiah, the one who did and said all of the things that Jesus said and did, and then suddenly is killed in front of everybody, how would you actually feel? Like, put yourself in the story, actually. Like, what's like an emotion that maybe you're feeling? I wrote a couple of them down. I was thinking of different versions of myself in the story. I feel like I might be shamed, might feel shame. I might be embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. I followed this guy. I sold my stuff. I told people I wanted to go and do a different life. I would be angry. I just watched something horrible. I'd feel betrayed. This guy said he was the king. I would be sad. That's what the text says. It says they were feeling sadness. Confusion. Totally confused. And while they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus approaches, and they can't see who it is. And who is it? It's Jesus. Can they see him, though? Do they actually see Jesus, though? They see him. They see this guy. They even start talking to him, and this guy starts talking back to them. So they know that it's a person, but they don't know that it's Jesus. So they can see, but they actually can't see, you see? Some people use this story to talk about how the resurrected body of Jesus would have been unrecognizable, something that was like miraculous and mysterious, and people wouldn't be able to even recognize who he is. But that's not what the text says. That's not what the gospel passages are about. It says that their eyes were kept from seeing him, not that Jesus was unrecognizable. So this story is telling the reader, us today, about how someone really can be walking alongside of Jesus and perhaps miss him entirely. 18. And then one of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, "Are you possibly the only one living near Jerusalem who doesn't know about the things that have taken place?" So we get to know one of these people's names that are walking. One of the two disciples is Cleopas. And he starts talking to Jesus like he must be somebody who literally is from another planet. He says, "Hello, are you actually from somewhere else?" Actually, that's funny if you think about who Jesus is. He says, "Are you basically the only one who's around here who hasn't actually heard or seen the things that we've heard and that we have seen? Do you not want to know what's going on at all?" Jesus' response is actually hilarious. He says, "What sorts of things?" And then they say, all the incredible things that Jesus did and said, and then how they took him, and it was terrible. But then verse 21 says, and they went on, and this is kind of like the big moment for them. It says, to Jesus, they say, "But we were hoping that it would be he who was going to redeem Israel." We were hoping that he would redeem us. So this word hope in the Greek, it's the word elopiso, and that word means to put one's hope into an expectation. The Hebrew equivalent to this word, I have it on the screen, is the word kavah. This word kavah means to wait in expectation. So when I naturally think of the word hope, I think of ways that I would use this word. I hope that the weather is nice this weekend. I definitely want to go mountain biking. I hope that the band plays their old stuff. I hope Kyle's sermon is less than 40 minutes today. Spoiler alert, it won't be. I've practiced. Biblical hope is not optimism. In fact, the most hopeful people in the Bible often had very few reasons to believe that things were ever going to get better. But biblical hope is based not in circumstances, but in the unchanging character of Yahweh, their God. So this Hebrew word, kavah, means to wait in expectation. This is the cool thing about Hebrew words, is there's no vowels, there's just dots that mean vowels, so everything's consonants. There's no numbers, so the letters mean numbers as well. We've talked about this a lot here at church, but there's a lot of times there's words within the word. There's root words, and the root words have their own meanings. So kavah is, I think I have another slide. Kavah is these three letters, so it's kavaha. And so if you were to take just the root, so you read from right to left, it's kav. This word kav is actually a noun. It's a chord that you would use for measuring. So if Martin had one end of this cord and I had the other, and we're like, okay, we need to build this structure, we need to figure out how many bricks we need to have made, you would pull a cord and I would pull a cord, and if I was doing church correctly, I would bring a sermon illustration, but I didn't, and we would be pulling on this string as tight as we possibly can. Because if like Martin's kind of getting lazy, you know, and he starts like walking a little bit towards me, I'm like, no, it needs to be tight. We need to make sure this is actually, we need to know how long this is supposed to be. So he would pull and I would pull, and then we would get down and we would put it on the ground. You know those things you snap with a chalk, those things? There's like men in this room, so I know that you guys know what that is. I'm like not one of those men. I'm like, you know that thing that dads use? It would be like that. You would want to make sure it was a precise line so that you can measure properly. What's interesting that this noun kav is in the word kavah, which means to hope, is why is there a string made for measuring in the word hopefulness that means an expectation that I'm waiting in? It's not like, oh man, I have hope. It's like tense. Do you kind of feel it? There's like something in kavah that's like unsure. Because when I pull that string real tight, one of two things are going to happen. Either there's going to be relief at some point, or it's going to snap. The center of that string is feeling a tension. It's almost beautiful that the word hope actually has this tension built into the word. It's like when I feel hope, but I know that hope also means waiting, and waiting also means nothing, potentially. I'm happy to know that for thousands of years, people have felt that it's actually really tense. It's actually really intense. I think about that tension and say, is it going to snap when we pull this string? If we pull too hard, is it going to break? How long do we have to actually keep holding on to this thing? Will I ever feel relief? Are we even still talking about a piece of string at this point? Or are we talking about our hearts? So let's just pause for a second. Are you today feeling this in any way of your life? Is there an area where you have a hopeful expectation that feels like it's the center of a rope pulling so tight inside of you, at any moment it could snap, or it could feel relief? You could be let down, or you could be fulfilled. The writer of Psalm 130 definitely had this on the mind. He says, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and I wait for his word. My soul waits in kavah for the Lord. More than the watchmen in the morning, yes, more than the watchmen for the morning, Israel, wait for the Lord. For the Lord, there is mercy, and with him is abundant redemption. And he will redeem Israel for all of his guilty deeds. The psalmist has this on the mind, on the brain, that hope, intention, and probably and maybe, but actually probably not, is also tied with redemption, definitely, salvation, for sure, it's going to happen. It's like, what? How do we hold both of those? The language here is so loaded. And these two disciples who are walking who are now telling the Jesus, they just can't see that it's him, that the cross that they just saw is not a victory. It was a sign of utter defeat. To us, the modern reader, we need to remember that. We need to remember that this is what the people would have been feeling. Importing how we see victory was not what the original audience would have been imagining. To them, the cross is a failure, not a victory. But we were hoping that it was he who would redeem Israel. So this word redeem to us also is a little bit like removed from the biblical aspect of redeem. We say, oh, I'm going to redeem this ticket, or I'm going to redeem some points that I earned for something, cash it in for something else. But this word redeem to the biblical authors often would have portrayed a divine rescue and a moment of salvation in their place in history. It often portrays a rescue that is needed by something that is beyond yourself. Actually, the first time this word redeem actually appears in the Bible is in Exodus 6, 5 through 8. Do we have that? Oh my gosh, it's working. So Exodus 6, 5 through 8 says, "Furthermore, I have heard the groaning," this is Yahweh speaking, "groaning of the sons of Israel, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the labors of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that it is I, the Lord, your God, who brought you out from under the labors of the Egyptians." So these two disciples, they've got this on the mind, these old stories. They're walking on the road hoping that he would redeem. That's the way the story's supposed to go. We're supposed to hope in tension. We're supposed to wait, and he will rescue us like he always has. So what do they actually mean by this then? Well, because right now they are seeing that their hope is tied up in a man named Jesus, who they thought was the Messiah, who would accomplish what Yahweh has promised as someone who has died but then failed. And so that renders redemption as a lost cause, as something that they will not be experiencing. Hope, utter tension, and it feels like it's going to break, and redemption totally pulled out from underneath them. Emmaus. Remember, the story is called the Road to Emmaus. So remember, that's where they're walking from. So they're in Jerusalem, and they have the 7-mile stretch, and they're walking to a place called Emmaus. So if you heard the word Emmaus, if you don't know where Emmaus is, that's normal because we're not in this time frame. But the word Emmaus would have imported a lot of things to the original here. This word is not random, and this place is not just put here because it happens to be 7 miles away. There's an intentionality in the way the biblical authors would have wrote this story. So this word Emmaus would be like if I were to say, oh yeah, we went to New York City this weekend, and while we were in New York City, we visited the site of the towers. What's the first thing you think of when I say the towers? 9/11. It imports, right? Everything. Where were you? How old were you? I was in woodshop in 8th grade. Like, what was happening? Like, what happened right afterward? What was going on the TV screen? It would import a million things. What my parents were talking about in the other room, about politics and blah, blah, blah. Like, your brain imports things when you hear the word 9/11. So when they said the word Emmaus, it would have had a very similar effect. It's hard to find this. The way that it's a really cool story. It actually takes place in a place that they would have studied very heavily. Like, this would have been on the ancient Judean mind. There's a book called First Maccabees. It's found in like the Deuterocanonical books. Also, it's called the Apocrypha as well. So if you were in First Maccabees chapter 4, there's this really cool story. It's actually a scene that kind of reminds me of like the last scene in Return of the King with Aragorn, when he's like walking up and down, like they're in front of the gates, and he's like kind of giving the big speech, like we could die, but also we're walking into a victory. So there's this cool story. The guy's name is Judas Maccabeus. Judas Maccabeus, his name Maccabeus means in Hebrew, the hammer. So this name is Judas the Hammer. And he stands in front of all of the people in 1 Maccabees 4. This is 150 years prior to this story taking place. And he gives them a speech on the mountain right before they're about to go into battle against what seems like the odds are totally against them. And he says from the scene, a powerful speech, he says, "We will have victory, and they will know of Yahweh who redeems and saves Israel." And what comes next is the battle of Emmaus, and they win. The battle is won in Emmaus. It's hard to not disconnect the fact that everyone was going to Jerusalem to see a victory, and then it fails in their mind. So where do they go next? The last time we heard about a victory, maybe we should go to Emmaus. Maybe it was just written in here so that way like the story would make sense when you're reading it, but the Emmaus was the place of, at least this was one of the last times we heard of us winning. After a few verses of them explaining this to this man, it's Jesus, they still don't know it's him, about how all now feels lost and confusing, and about how people went to the tomb, and there's all these rumors floating around, and the women went there, but the men aren't believing them. That was their first mistake, by the way. Like, constant things are going on. Maybe like somebody took his body. They're totally confused. In verses 25 and 26, Jesus then steps in and interrupts and says, "You foolish men of slow heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to come into his glory?" You see, for Jesus, victory does not come the way that these disciples anticipated. Jesus' vision for redemption does not come through weapons and battle and carrying home the people redeemed from the enemy in the same way that was conventional wisdom of the time. No, not by the means of killing, but by the means of being killed. You see, the disciples still cherished ambition for the nation of Israel and for themselves within that story. And this shows that they have not yet grasped the radical nature of Jesus' agenda. All of what was happening pointed to a final battle, one to be won. But Jesus reinterprets the battle that would ultimately generate something entirely new, something that no one would see coming. You see this theme that's in here, the seeing of the eyes and not seeing this coming. I heard something recently, it was a quote, it was this: "Jesus did not go to the cross so that I don't have to, he went to the cross to show me how to." But Jesus taught these lessons well. He certainly walked the walk, did he not? If we look at Matthew 5:44 through 46, this is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may prove yourselves to be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors do this, do they not do the same?" This is a Jesus who is teaching in the center of his lesson what it means to actually look beyond what we see and see with something different. If my eyes are going to betray me, maybe this is why Jesus talks about gouging out the eye. If the eye is going to be the thing that I see and interpret, it's almost like the original see, delight, take, eat. When I see something, when I take it, I'm guided by something that is going to mislead me. And Jesus is trying to point them to something different in this story. They said, "We didn't see a victory." And he's like, "I know, because you were looking with your eyes." I had this sobering thought when I was preparing for this, and I was thinking, man, it's so easy to judge these two disciples. How did they not see you as Jesus? Don't they have the scriptures? Don't they know the Old Testament? Don't they speak 4 different languages and all the different translations? Don't they have the Septuagint? It's not that they didn't know Hebrew. It's not that they didn't know Greek. Why didn't they know? It's like I can judge them. That's so silly. How did they not? They had hindsight. The sobering thought is that I could judge them at the same time. I myself have Jesus' Sermon on the Mount right here or right here every single day while I hate people who are different than me. It's crazy. But Jesus walked the walk. He walked it right into Jerusalem. He walked right into the city that would hand him up to the cross. Did Jesus see what he was doing as redemption? Totally. He went so far as to have beautiful symbolism the night before with his disciples. He sat everybody down during Passover. The timing wasn't just perfect, it was entirely intentional. He sat them down, and he would use bread and wine to depict rich imagery that would link all the way back to the original Passover in Exodus. He would show that the bread broken and the wine poured out would be his body and his blood, showing his disciples the true meaning and the way to redemption of love, of Yahweh's words that we just recently read, that I will be your God and you will be my people. And verse 27, and then beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he explained to them the things written about himself in the scriptures. Do you ever have a passage that you get to and when you're reading and you're like, this is the most frustrating verse I've ever read in my life. This is like I'm like, ugh, what did he say? If we knew what he said, we wouldn't have like 40 denominations or at worst kill each other. Like the most important thing the Bible could possibly say is, and then beginning with Moses, he told them everything what the Old Testament means. And I'm like, hey, Luke, where's the Bible study? Like, to be a fly on the wall. Luke's not even an eyewitness. He never met Jesus. He's going around talking to people. He's gathering info, and they're like, oh my gosh, guess what? He was walking with these two, and he told them everything. What did he tell them? Oh, anyway, I got to go. I'm like, that was he had one job, in my opinion. To be a fly on the wall of the road to Emmaus and to be in Jesus' Bible study, holy cow, would be amazing. Verse 28 through 31. This is pretty fun. They're all walking together, still don't know it's Jesus. And then the best line happens. He gave them the impression that he was going further. It's almost like Jesus was in the midst of all of this tension. It's lightening up a little bit because he's starting to talk back. He's like, yeah, so anyway, I'm just going to keep going. Okay, I'll come inside and eat food. He's like waiting and lingering for them to invite him in for food. Jesus, John Mark Comer says this, Jesus is either on his way to food, eating, or he just got done eating in the Gospel of Luke. It's like he's like the food guy. So classic Jesus, he's like making fish, with like Peter on the water. All these resurrection scenes involve food. This one doesn't involve food yet. And Jesus is not going to let that happen. He's like, okay, I'll come in. And look at what verses 30 through 31 says. And remember, these two still have no idea that it's Jesus. And it came about when he reclined at the table with them that he took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. He's like laying it on super thick at this point. Like, this is a Jesus move. Not only did he just do this a week ago, he also like has done this when he's feeding 5,000 people, when he feeds 4,000 people. This is like a Jesus like Hallmark card. And then their eyes were opened and they recognized that it was him. And then he vanished from their sight. So the eyes and the heart are both mentioned in this passage almost in contrast. If you flip back to, and you don't have to right now because we're going to move quickly here, 1 Samuel 9, 1 through 2, it talks about the first king. So this is like when Israel is like, oh, like we need a king. All the other nations have kings. And Yahweh's like, I'm your king. And they're like, no, we want a different king. And he's like, okay, you can have a different king. And so then they go and they find this guy named Saul. And what it says in 1 Samuel 9, 1 through 2 is that it says that Saul was tall and handsome and good looking and exactly what you want in a king. He was like the guy. It was what the people wanted to see in their king. This is going to be contrasted a little bit later with 1 Samuel 16, 6 through 11, because now we're getting to David, the story of David. Yahweh is now looking for another one to anoint. And he goes to this guy named Jesse, and he has his prophet Samuel go to him, and he says, hey, go talk to Jesse and find someone else I want to anoint. Go through the sons. Okay, well, here's all my sons. Start with the oldest. Keep going. Shows him all of them. Yahweh rejects all of them. So he says, is there not another among your sons? And Jesse's like, well, yeah, there's the younger. He's like small and weak, and David. He's like a shepherd boy. He's here. And this is one of the best lines in the Old Testament. It says, Yahweh ends up saying, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, which is a direct contrast to Saul 10 chapters earlier. He was tall and handsome and good looking. Don't look at his height or his stature, because I have rejected him. For God does not see as man sees. since man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord Yahweh looks at the heart. So if we were to go even further back from Samuel, I'll actually let N.T. Wright kind of take it from here. He says the first meal mentioned in the Bible is the moment when Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit. The direct result is new and unwelcomed knowledge. Their eyes were both opened, and they knew that they were naked. It's Genesis 3:7. Now this other couple, Cleopas and his companion, are at the table, and they're confronted with new and deeply welcomed knowledge. This is Jesus. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. This contrast from Genesis 3:7 all the way to Luke 24:31 is not on accident and is not a gymnastics trick. This is intentional. This is Luke saying, this is the ultimate story of redemption. This is the meal which signifies that the long exile of the human race, not just for Israel, is over at last. This is the start of new creation. This is the 8th day. This is a whole new thing. This is why repentance and forgiveness of sins are to be announced to all of the nations, not just to some. And there it is, the pulse that we actually need to put our finger on with this story. The heartbeat of everything. The invitation is right here, holding on to both of these things. The hope and all of the challenges that hope have. Hope is a word we use all the time, but it also kind of sucks. It's like, I hate hoping. I want redemption. I want to hold redemption, not hope. And at the same time, it's a story about redemption and all of its truths. The fact that redemption is a reality and is a truth right now. And this Easter season that we're in is an invitation for us to hold on to both of those things right now. To hold on with a heart that burns holy for Jesus and his teachings. So many of the kings in the Old Testament, they have this contrast. It'll start at the beginning of a passage when it's talking about a king, and it'll say, and this king did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Or this king did what Yahweh loved. He sought righteousness and justice and so on. There's this contrast of having eyes for your own good or having eyes on what God wants. Having a heart that is completely separated from God and towards idolatry, or being a king whose heart is wholly devoted to God. This happens with the King Asa. It kind of happens in the middle of a section where it's talking about all these terrible kings. Solomon came. Solomon seems great. He's like, I'm going to build a house for God. And God's like, I don't think I needed one, but that's fine. And then he's like, I built you a house. And I spent 7 years doing it. Oh, sweet number. And then the next verse is, and then Solomon built himself a house. And he spent 13 years building that. And it was awesome. So it's like there's this downfall of the kings. Like, I did a great thing, but I wasn't fully committed. And then Asa shows up on the scene, and it says, Asa was a man who was wholly devoted in his heart to God. The heart is what is being amplified, not what we see with our eyes. Jesus picks this up pretty well in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, to be perfect as your heavenly Father is also perfect. This word perfect in English is a bit of a miss if we do it too quickly, because perfection seems like something I can't do. This word in the Greek actually means to be whole, for your Father Yahweh in heaven is also whole. To have a heart that's wholly devoted. And if we miss it, we head down a road where we justify what we see as the path to victory. We see what is good in our own eyes, and we start taking and eating. We start leading to a road of seeking victory by destruction. There is an enemy underneath and behind who we actually think our enemy is in this life, who has played us. When you say, oh, such and such is my enemy, or you watch the news and you're like, they're the enemy, you're being played. Because there's an enemy behind this that loves that orchestration, loves us to go after ourselves. Paul's going to pick this up later on too. He's going to say this has nothing to do with flesh and blood, but it's against the principalities, the spiritual realms. There's something else going on. Stop looking with your eyes. Close them and look with your heart that's wholly devoted to God, following after Jesus' teachings. And Jesus shows his disciples the way of this redemption and how it has always been that seen is not what we believe is good in our own eyes, but it is with a heart that is going to be devoted to God, and it's the way of breaking our own selves and pouring our own selves out. Tim Mackey says this. He says, "The good news of the bread and the cup is that God loves his enemy, and that he will defeat evil and sin in this world precisely through suffering and self-giving love." And as we today, we're going to come to the table here in a few seconds. We recognize in this Eastertide season that the cross and the resurrection of Jesus, the Messiah, is a scandal. And that scandal is one of grace that is poured out, an invitation by God himself to come. What this looks like in our own world, in your own personal context, God willing, our stories, I can't wait for us to share with one another. But we need to, as the disciples are going to say just in a few verses after this, we need to approach with hearts that are burning after what is good and true and beautiful. The disciples talked after Jesus vanished, and they said, "Were our hearts not literally on fire?" I can't help but notice that Psalm 111 and all of the songs that were sung today, by the way, this message is for next week. We flipped this week and next week, so I'm preaching next week, so we flipped the script, and I was like sitting here listening to the psalm being read and the songs, and so many of them had to do with, especially in Closer, like this heart for God. And I'm like, this is so good because it's so true, and it's so good, and it's so beautiful. And the disciples knew that. They said, were our hearts not burning when he opened this thing up and told us everything that was true and good and beautiful? Were we not on fire? And then they're like, maybe we should go listen to what those women had to say. Like, maybe we should get back together with everyone and start talking about this thing. For Jesus' words filling full all of the scriptures, that there is a new way to be a human, and it is in imitating the Messiah, Jesus, for his kingdom come right here and right now. That's our invitation, to hold both hope in all of its really complicated stuff, and the fact that there's real redemption. Today, we live in new creation. The new day has started. We got to see the first real, actual human, Jesus, and following his words and his teachings. This is us holding that there is this paradox in being from the dust and also crowned with glory and honor, as Psalm 8 says. That we are dirt people from Genesis 2, but we're breathed into by the Ruach of Yahweh. Like we are both. We are hope, and that there's real, true redemption. I hope that in this passage, that as we reread it this week, as we find more stories in the resurrection during this Eastertide, that both of them are true for us. That the tension just loosens a little bit, and the true redemption that we can see, maybe we need to close our eyes. So, Father, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for this text, and I thank you for this truth. I pray that the people in this room and myself, that we may see with our hearts wholly devoted to you. That it's not at what my eyes see and what my eyes desire and what my eyes want for me to take, but it is with a heart that is wholly devoted, burning after what you desire. We thank you for the new mercy, the new grace, and the peace, and the redemption in Easter. In Jesus' name.